The Dragonback series by Timothy Zahn. Book 1, Dragon and Thief. Chapter 25.
Dracos leaped from Jack's sleeve as high as he could. His outstretched claws caught the side of the boxes and the netting that held them in place. The netting was a perfect grip, and he ran up the side of the stack, going nearly as fast as he could have on flat ground. He scrambled over the edge onto the top and immediately twisted around to cautiously look down. The caution wasn't necessary. The three humans below weren't looking around for him, but had eyes only for Jack and Braxton. Most likely, they were completely unaware of what had just taken place. He pulled back from the edge, giving the room a quick look. There was a series of narrow walkways hanging from the ceiling above him. He leaped to the nearest of them, managing to get over the safety railing and onto the walkway itself without making any noise. Keeping his claws withdrawn, running silently on the soft pads of his paws, he headed back toward the door they'd come in through. Twice now, Jack had stopped him when he was preparing for action. The first time, two Wistwaki had died because of it. The second time, up in Braxton's suite, he would probably have succeeded, but at a cost that he now realized could have been disastrous. Because there was more at stake here than Braxton's life, more even than Jack's life, and that was saying a great deal. Jack was his host, and there was a high debt of honor between a Kadar warrior and his host. But even that honor could not balance against the lives of the entire Kadar race. The human who had spoken to Jack aboard the Advocatus Diabli had been part of the plot against his people, and whether Cornelius Braxton himself was part of it or not, it was likely that some of those around him were, which meant he could not permit Braxton to know of his existence. Even if it cost Jack his life? Dracos felt a knife point of guilt digging beneath his scales as he raced along the hanging walkway toward the door. What had Jack intended him to do just now, he wondered. Had he expected him to leap onto Raven and the others as they came around the corner? Because he could have done exactly that. Jack's risky break for freedom had startled the enemy into carelessness, causing them to bunch together. He could have taken all three of them without trouble, probably before any of them had even known they were under attack. But then Braxton would have seen him, and if he had, the Kadar race might have died. So instead, Dracos had hidden out of sight on top of the boxes. Jack had been recaptured and would now suffer whatever punishment Raven demanded for his action. Soon, perhaps, he would die. What did Jack think Dracos was doing now? Did he think Dracos was preparing a trap? Did he expect to suddenly have a Kadar warrior drop into their midst, slashing and clawing? Or did he think Dracos might be running away? Thoughts of Uncle Virgil flickered through Dracos's mind. Uncle Virgil and his ghostly echo inside the SNA's computer. That human had taught Jack to think only about himself, to do only that which benefited him. Was the boy even capable of thinking about higher things? Would he understand the idea of sacrificing something you valued or someone you cared about for something even more valuable? Even if he did, would he think the Kadar and Shantine worth the sacrifice of his life? Probably not. Given time, Dracos knew, he could teach the boy about such things as honor and integrity and justice. Jack had the potential to stand with the very finest of the Kadar and Shantine. But he wasn't there yet. Would he be able to find the strength to calmly die so that the Kadar and Shantine might live? Dracos didn't think so. But if he did his job right, neither of them would have to find out. He reached the end of the walkway above the door. Fastened to the wall just below the ceiling was his target, the now familiar square box of an emergency lighting system. From the battery pack, a thick wire rose to reach the system's two lights. Two quick slashes of his claws and the wires were cut. He spun around on the walkway and headed back. There were 4 other clusters of emergency lights on the ceiling, each of the groups arranged in a circle with the lights facing outward. Moving along the grid, he made his way to each cluster in turn. Slashing systematically at the wires, he quickly disabled them. And with that, everything was ready. He headed for the far end of the room, hoping he would be in time. The sound of humans' footsteps had stopped, but his view of them was still blocked. He sped along the walkway, blood tingling through his muscles and scales with his fear of what he would see. He passed the last stack of boxes and looked down. The humans had reached the far wall and were standing near a heavy door with a control panel and status board beside it. Jack and Braxton stood together with their backs to the wall near the door. Raven stood facing them, his weapon pointed at Braxton. Vance stood a few paces away in guard position, his weapon also ready, while Myers worked at the control panel. Draco slowed to a silent trot, studying the lights overhead as he moved toward the humans. The power wires weren't buried inside an outer wall, as they were in the public areas of the ship, but were merely fastened in plain sight against the ceiling. He wondered how much electrical power those wires contained, but it didn't really matter. Whatever was necessary, he would do it. Below him, the airlock door swung open. "This is it," Raven said. "Get in!" Braxton took a step toward the door. Jack didn't move. "What, already?" the boy asked. "No chance for last words? A blindfold? Anything?" Raven stepped over to him. Dracos couldn't see the human's expression, but his voice was suddenly vicious as he pressed his weapon into Jack's throat. "I hear death by asphyxiation isn't a bad way to go," he bit out. "Death by laser is! Now get in!" Jack still didn't move. "I think you're forgetting one thing, Raven. Mr. Braxton's DNA cylinder? Well, the fake one, but you know what I mean. It's still in the purser's safe. If he disappears now, aren't they going to wonder why he didn't take it with him?" Draco smiled grimly. That was Jack, all right. Comments, complaints, objections, questions. The boy was stalling for time, squeezing out every extra heartbeat he could to give his companion time to act. And in that moment, it occurred to Dracos that he could search far and wide throughout the Orion arm and not find a better host and ally than he had in Jack Morgan. He reached the end of the walkway. Jack and Braxton were almost directly below him now. "So he left the cylinder for his wife to use," Raven said with a snort. "We'll just make sure the story reads that he was planning to catch up with her on Parsonia." "What about the fake cylinder?" Jack persisted. "Don't you think they'll find it a little suspicious that there are two of them?" One of the power wires was directly over Dracos' head. Bracing himself, he lifted a paw and extended one of his claws. "Who's going to know?" Raven countered. "Once we get your uncle, we'll have the other cylinder too." He put a hand on Jack's shoulder and shoved him roughly toward the airlock. "Now get in!" Jack's shoulders drooped in defeat. Taking a deep breath, he turned toward the door. And with a defiant scream of the Kada battle cry, Draco sliced through the power line. There was a brilliant spark, a flashing tingle of shock through his paw, and the entire room was plunged into darkness. He was over the railing in an instant, dropping toward the floor below. In the faint light coming from the airlock control panel, he saw Raven spin around. Behind him, Jack grabbed Braxton's arm and pulled him to the floor. Vance and Myers had turned too, their weapons swinging back and forth as they searched for a target. Unconsciously, perhaps, the three humans had pulled together into a semicircle, their backs toward the wall facing outward. Dracos dropped to the floor directly behind them. Vance was first. Rising up on his hind legs, Draco slammed his front paw hard against the side of the human's head. He dropped without even a gurgle, his weapon clattering across the floor. There was a brief flash of light as Myers fired reflexively toward the noise. "Vance!" he yelped. "Raven!" He never finished the sentence. Dracos was already behind him, and with another slash of his paw, this second enemy also went flying. 3 shots burned through the air, one of them barely missing Dracos' left ear. He jumped aside to the right, hit the floor, and immediately dodged left, each leap zigzagging him closer to Raven. The human was making wordless sounds, trying desperately to back away as he fired again and again at the black shadow bearing down on him. But he couldn't back up nearly fast enough. Dracos made one final leap directly in front of him, batting his weapon out of his hand, then rising up on his hind paws to gaze directly into Raven's eyes. In the dim reflected light, he saw the look of terror on the human's face. Raven opened his mouth to scream or shout or perhaps even to plead. Draco struck. Not the disabling blows with which he had struck Vance and Myers. This was a much harder attack, aimed at Raven's neck instead of at the side of his head. Beneath his paw, he felt the bones snap. And Raven, the human who had killed 2 innocent Wistwaki in cold blood, dropped to the floor, dead. Across the room, he could hear the sounds of commotion now, and between the stacks of cargo came the wavering glint of handheld lights. Leaving his vanquished enemies, he crossed to Jack's side. The boy was lying protectively, half on top of Braxton, keeping both of them flat to the floor. His arm and hand were placed across the side of the other human's head, positioned so that Braxton wouldn't be able to see what was happening. Draco smiled, flicking his tongue in admiration. Yes, he had indeed found a worthy partner. The lights were getting closer, and there were anxious voices with them now. Stepping up behind Jack, Dracos put a paw on the back of his neck and melted back beneath his shirt onto his skin.
Jack?
He heard Braxton ask. Jack let out a breath in relief, stretching his shoulders as Draco settled into place. It's okay, he told Braxton, patting the older man on the back and getting to his feet. It's all over now.